Sweet.
Hardik, welcome.
Hey, how's it going, John?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Can't complain. I'm in Austin and we had like this weather scare. Texas can't handle when it gets too cold. So
Uh,
like everyone was freaking out if it was gonna ice and we have to close everything. But luckily in Austin at least we're good. So I can't complain.
that's funny because I'm here in Atlanta just until I'm leaving later today, but it's been in the 30s and the 20s. And
Hmm.
I used to live in the DC metro area, so it's like pretty normal.
Yeah.
But then I moved to Florida about a year ago and I already cannot handle the cold, so I'm
Oh, yeah,
getting
you
ready to go
lose it
back.
really quick. You
Yeah.
lose it like similar to I grew up outside of Dallas. But I went to undergrad at Penn State in Pennsylvania and
Uh-huh.
it's in the middle of the mountains. So then I was just used to it being like freezing constantly.
Yeah.
And then after a year after I moved back home, I was like, man, you guys are wimps. They can't handle it. And like the next year, I'm like, oh, I can't do it either anymore.
Yeah. Kind of like living down south. Um,
Yeah.
but anyways, so tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah. So I am a dentist by trade, right?
Mhm.
So we have a group of dental offices here in the Austin area, and we have one outside of Dallas. But I am, I practice clinically, not full time anymore, but most of my primary responsibilities now are, running and growing the business. And so yeah, it's been we started our first practice back in 2016 and we've kind of been this wasn't like honestly like ever like the master plan to grow a group of practices and do that. It was
Mhm.
like in the back of our minds, but yeah, we've had like been lucky and had some really good opportunities to grow the business. And yeah, that's we've been kind of steadily adding offices and growing and that kind of thing since back in 2016.
Okay, so interesting. You went to school to become a dentist, and then
Yep.
how do you transition to go from I'm working in someone's practice to owning your own?
It's just like a leap, basically.
Uh-huh.
So I'll give it like a little bit more background. So I graduated dental school in 2014. And I, just like everybody else, got a job, right? Or most people, right? A job out of dental school working for a really big group outside of Dallas. And this is how most of us are, like young dentists, especially when they're coming out, like we feel like we know everything. And
Mhm.
so I was like watching, and like these guys, I mean, they were doing a lot of things. They grew up quickly. When I joined their group, they had 30 offices, and I think within 12 months they had 50. Right, so they were growing at a crazy pace, and now I mean they're through in multiple states. They're huge, right? And so, but the theme for us was I didn't appreciate the job at the time as much as I should have, but for me, I worked with a lot of amazing people, whether it be our dental assistants or admin team, other doctors, and that kind of thing. But part of me felt like we weren't necessarily put in a position to succeed or do the best type of or deliver the best kind of care that we could. Um, for a variety of reasons. And some of it was like naivety because there's a very big difference from moving from like school and academic patient care to private practice care because it's just very different, right? And
Mhm.
that was a big transition. But we were young and we thought we could do anything. And so me and a really great friend of mine, my partner in the practices, his name is Dr. Devish Patel. We were like, hey, if these guys can do it, why can't we? And I mean, that is very very naive. They had a lot of stuff going for them. They had their stuff together, but we just kind of made the leap. Um, Originally, when we were looking to start, like have our own practice, we were looking at an acquisition, right? Because
Mhm.
that's what we were taught in school. It's like, hey, it's a lot easier to buy an existing practice,
Mhm.
continue to run it and improve than it would be to just do a scratch startup, right? Just start from scratch with no patients.
Yeah.
And so we looked, and I practiced in Dallas at the time, and we were looking to move to Austin, and so we were looking for practices in Austin. Austin is, I think, like many people may know, is a growing city, and
Mhm.
so the supply of existing practices at the time was pretty low because it had grown so much in a short amount of time, right? So there wasn't as many dentists selling necessarily, and we had looked at buying a practice, but existing, and we met the owner, had the LOI. He was excited to sell to us, and the bank decided that they would not finance the acquisition because they didn't think it was busy enough for to supply two dentists, even though if you look at the numbers objectively, it definitely could have, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so ironically, they just gave us a blank check to open a scratch startup, which again did not make sense to me, but do what you got to do. And so we had to pivot a little bit, and we got lucky that we were two kids with a gigantic negative net worth between our student loans and that kind
Mhm.
of thing. There was a group outside of San Antonio that had leased a couple like retail locations around Austin, and then they had some like internal issue where they were kind of piecing out the group essentially. And so they were
Mhm.
dropping out these leases last minute, and these landlords were looking for someone to take it over really fast, right? And
Mhm.
so we were able to swoop in at our first location, a location I think if it was like if they had time to shop it, we would never have gotten it. But we ended up signing that lease and went through the process of building and starting the practice.
So there's a lot of questions here.
Yeah.
So first, being in that environment where you're working for this group that is just constantly expanding, do you think that helped you push you on this path to do your own thing?
I think so. I saw what was possible, right? I wasn't necessarily in a private practice with like a single owner dog or anything like that. I was like
Mhm.
in this group, they're expanding heavily. I'm like seeing what they're doing. They're trying all this stuff. I'm like, okay, well, if they can do it at this scale, then why can't I just do it at one office?
Yeah.
And so it would definitely. We learned a ton of stuff, and that's why I mentioned like probably didn't appreciate the job as much as I should have at the time, right?
Mhm.
Because I would just complain about it just like young people would, like a young naive person would.
Yeah.
And then looking back on it, we applied so many of the things that we learned in that first year that we worked at that practice or that for that group into what we ended up doing, good and bad, partially.
Right. So then how did you even understand how to go through the financials? Is that something that they taught you in school or?
No, no, definitely not. That was a lot of just like self learning, honestly, and that's still happening, right?
Mhm.
It was like doing a lot of reading at the beginning, talking to a lot of people. Obviously, we worked with an accountant at the beginning, and so like talking through what was there. There are actually pretty solid. There's way more now, but when we were looking to or we were starting the business, there were a lot of really good courses that we could go to that were about practice, like startups and what
Mhm.
to look at. And so we went to a couple of those, and that gave us a good foundation. So we weren't just like flying by the seat of our pants completely.
Right. Well, I mean, another like big question is if you're just graduating, you have a negative net worth because of the student loans. Why would the banks not give you a loan to buy an established? Did they give you any reasoning as to why they would give you a loan
Yeah.
to start up versus buying an established business?
So for the obviously the loan size was very different, right?
Hmm.
The practice that we were looking at, I mean, I think it was doing like $1.3 million a year, right, in
Hmm.
total revenue. And so the practice loan was, I mean, in dentistry, like when dentists sell to other dentists, they look at like 90 to 100% of net production or collections is what they call it. And so
Hmm.
that's what the loan was going to be. I think the other thing that really made it tough for them to want to finance it, is a real estate included, right? Like the guy owned the building and the
Hmm.
land that was on. So I mean, you were talking about probably nearly a $3 million loan, right?
Got it.
And
Okay.
so that definitely played a role. The reasoning that they gave us though was we don't think it's busy enough for the both of you.
Right. Hmm.
Which, like objectively, if you look at the numbers, I'm like, it definitely is, right? Because you know, the amount a single dentist can do, I mean, a really great one can do that 1.3, but like we were young. I mean, that could have fed us both. And the startup loan was way smaller. That you could get a lot, right? But we were very frugal because we were
Hmm.
like, opening it up, trying to do a lot of stuff on our own at the time because we were just like, hey, we don't want to spend too much money on this right now because again, we were just starting out, right? So it's
Yeah.
not like we had a ton of working experience either.
Yeah. I mean, that also goes into, well, then how do you know that you can afford this office, this
Which
office
one?
space? The one where you were taking over someone else's lease, essentially.
Oh yeah. I mean, we didn't. And so for us, the thing was when we started, we're like, okay, we just won't pay ourselves until we can justify it,
Mm,
essentially, right?
yeah.
Like we had enough saved up. We're lucky, right, that it wasn't necessary, and I was lucky that my wife was, working at the time too,
Mhm.
so it wasn't completely necessary. So it was a lot of just like baking in some costs into our original like practice loan in terms of like working capital and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so, and the nice thing was with this like brand new build out, we got like the tenant improvement allowance as well.
Mhm.
So that kind of was like the capital, including some of the working capital from our like business loan that we used to kind of push us through for like 6 to 8 months essentially. And we ran lean, right? That was the
Mhm.
big thing, is like it was me, my partner, we had two other employees, a dental assistant and an office manager at the time. And actually, our office manager, because she had a family emergency, actually had to resign after like a month. And so
Oh,
it was
okay.
just three of us running the show. And so it was, we were very careful about how we spent money as well at the beginning, just because
Yeah,
we didn't have much to fall back on.
that makes sense. I mean, did you target when you were taking or looking for a location, were you targeting dentist office that already had the build out, or did it just kind of fall in your lap?
So initially, I mean, our goal was to buy an existing practice, right? So there's
Mm,
like practice brokers and that kind of thing. So we will talk to a bunch of those guys, and there was a handful of places that we looked at. And then we had already started talking to like a commercial real estate agent
mm,
that specializes in like medical, dental, or like optometry, that kind of thing. And so we had talked to him, and we had looked at a bunch of retail locations that we were like, there's a metric that we look at, especially when in terms of like brand new build outs. I mean, even acquisitions too, and it's the dentist to population ratio,
mm,
right? And so our goal is we don't really like to open or look at any locations if that ratio is less than 3,000 to 1. And 2,000 to 1 is what the ADA says is like the minimum that you need to like for a new practice to be able to sustain a practice. But that's a hard place to work from if you're starting from the minimum. So 3,000 was our floor, kind of, right? And
right.
so we looked at that, and the location was perfect. I mean, it's one of our best locations still, in terms of visibility and like where in Austin it is, and obviously the demographics and metrics are favorable too.
Right. Oh, so it just kind of worked out really, really nicely.
We got super lucky. I mean, like that one was, I didn't even see the spot like location until after we signed the lease. Like my partner was in Austin, and he FaceTimed me when we got the call, and he's like, "All right, I'm like right across." Like he was like at this taco place like around the corner called Torchy's, and
Mm,
he's like, when we got the call from the real estate, he's like, "I'll just walk over there right now to look at it." And
mm,
he FaceTimed me from there, and he's like, "Dude, I think this is the location." Because we looked at like 7 or 8 different retail spots up to that
right.
point.
Um, you mentioned you mentioned this is like off topic, but you mentioned Torchies. Is it really as good as everyone says it is?
So I think Torchies is good.
Uh,
Is it as good as it used to be, like back in the day? Probably not, right?
uh,
But it's solid. Like if you've never had it before, I think it's really good. If you're in Austin, it's like if you never had it, you should definitely go. We should go. We used to go quite a bit,
yeah.
but we don't really get it as much. Like I've lived in Austin since 2015 now, so it's not like a staple for us anymore. But their queso is
Mm.
definitely the best queso you can get.
Oh, that's good to know because one opened up like 20 minutes from my house, and so I
Okay,
just haven't
nice.
gone. I've heard a lot of good things about it. I just haven't checked it out.
Yeah, check it out, dude. Their queso is definitely the best, I think. And I'm vegetarian, so I always get the fried avocado taco, but
Uh-huh.
it's really good.
That's good to know. Um, so going back to the topic at hand. Um, so you get the office, or you get the office space, and then what happens next?
Yeah, so once we get into like obviously lease negotiation and sign the lease, like during that process when we're getting close, build out wise, it's like, okay, we got to start planning the space, we got to build it out. So a lot of it was like, okay, now working with, and these are pitfalls that we learned afterwards, but we worked with our like a dental equipment supplier to design the floor plan, right?
Mhm.
Because they offer free design services, because you're gonna buy equipment for them and that kind of
Right.
thing. So we had done that. Once we had like a floor plan, we talked to like 5 or 6 different contractors, bid out the project, and kind of chose one. Now afterwards, we realized like if we the hard part about using, and we actually still do that, but the hard part about using your equipment supplier at the time to do the floor plan is we didn't know anything, right? And a lot of
Mhm.
times for us, I'm looking to be really, it's a small space. It's 1,700 square foot. Like it's not that big for a dental office. So we're
Mhm.
like trying to maximize as much space as possible.
Yeah.
And their goals aren't necessarily aligned to necessarily maximize the space. They want to maximize the equipment, right?
Right.
And what you're,
Yeah.
and so I mean, we were again pretty cheap, so like we were able to make it work. But I know a lot of dentists have gotten taken advantage of in those situations where they end up like signing up, like designing the space in a particular way that's maybe not the best way to do it. But that was step number one: designing the space, finding the contractors, kind of determining what type of equipment you want, and then getting all that stuff. And then like the stuff you like, that stuff is not hard. The stuff we know nothing about is like literally everything else related to the business, right? Where we got to like hire people, interview people, we have to do all of our insurance credentialing, set up like our accounting systems, and like there's this all and set up the entire system, like patient experience systems and all that kind of stuff. So that's what like the next like 8 to 9 months sort of consisted with.
Mhm. Right. So you kind of came in just not really knowing a ton. Did you have any kind of mentorship or anyone to help you say this is how you should run your business?
Kind of. So both me and my partner, our families had businesses growing up, right? So I had
Okay.
like some like some knowledge about how things should work and that kind of thing. And we were lucky. I mean, the dental community is small, and so I knew a couple people that were either had opened up a practice, and we're young, so like that's not my friends. We were the
Mm.
one of the first people, outside of one other friend who had bought a practice right after graduation, but people going through it at the same time. So we were talking to see what they were doing at the same time, but we didn't really have any mentorship of people yet that had done it at like in it like successfully.
Mm.
We were lucky. There was a really amazing course that we had went to about 4 or 5 months before we opened our office. That I mean, without that course, I mean, we would have been in a different place, right? And so, his the guy who taught the course, it was called Breakaway. His name's Scott Luna. I mean, amazing. I mean, if anyone is wanting to start a dental practice, it's one of the best courses to go to because it's like walks you through like from A to Z, like the operations of how he ran his practices and that kind of thing. So it gives you a really good template to run off of.
That includes like marketing for startups and everything too.
Yeah, so he
Mm.
has a couple, like he had a startup one, he had a business, like after you start like running the business part one. So it was very in depth. It's really good. I mean, it's if there's any dentists are out there and looking to open a practice, it's a must.
Yeah. So now that you're like kind of looking back at this, it sounds like it was pretty smooth sailing. How challenging was it?
It's easy to say. It was definitely not smooth sailing. Um, but it was incredibly challenging, right? Because we left our jobs in July of 2015,
Mhm.
expecting that the office was going to take 4 to 5 months to build, thinking
Mhm.
that January, February it was going to open, and we did open until May of 2016, right?
Yeah.
And we had already moved to Austin. Well, so I didn't have a job for a while because dentists generally we work on a contract basis, right? So,
Mhm.
say like usually 12 to 18 month contracts. Like I can't sign a contract for that long because I don't know when my practice is going to open, right?
Yeah.
And so, finding which I didn't know existed, but temp dentist work exists. So didn't know that was a thing, but that helped. But even just like the uncertainty was really challenging, right? Because one, even though say it after the fact now, it's like okay, we hit this, and this. Like we did not know at all, right? Like up
Mhm.
until we took that course in January before we opened, it was just like trying to read as much as you can. There's a couple books. Like social media wasn't as big, so there was a lot less like resources and people or coaches that you could like find to help. And
Mhm.
so it was a lot of just like digging through, trying to find as many resources as you can, any pieces of knowledge, and then trying to piece it together, right? And then obviously we were in a startup and there's 2 dentists there. So that's like a big no-no, right? You're just
Mhm.
like, you're not going to be able to feed both of you. But so I mean, it was a lot of hard work, a lot of time, and like luck too, right? Because us getting that location set us up for success, and timing was perfect for us because the way when we opened our practice, the way we did things was a little bit different than definitely the dentists that were around us. So,
Yeah. So what kind of mindset issues did you have to get over to actually begin this whole thing?
oh, I mean, the same. Ironically, the same type of mindset issues I have to get over still, but just on
Uh-huh.
a different scale. I mean, it's a
Uh,
lot of imposter syndrome, and I think I'm sure like a lot of entrepreneurs can resonate, right? Because it's
mhm.
like, am I really an expert here? Like, am I,
Yeah. Yeah.
and a lot of uncertainty. And I think really like believing in yourself that things were possible and you could do it was definitely something I had to work on, right? I did like zero personal development mindset work, anything like that, like up
Mhm.
until then. Like
Yeah.
life was very much like a defined path. Like I was in high school, you go to
Mhm.
college. I was in college, now I go to grad school. Grad school is dental school. So I go through 4 years of dental school. I either go to residency or start working. And then it's like, okay, now I start working. I'm like, now what?
Yeah.
Like there was like everything was just like this is what you do next, this is what you do next. So a lot of I think a lot of like especially like dental medical like that those kinds we're in school for so long and we get
Mhm.
put out into the real world. Like we haven't done now I think it's a bit different, but we haven't done much work on ourselves, right? Like really understanding limiting beliefs, understanding what holds us back, understanding motivation, that kind of thing. I mean, there was a ton of work that I had to do on that kind of stuff, like especially at the beginning. And I think I had the nice thing is I definitely had an irrational confidence about it. It was that about it how it was going to work. I
Yeah.
mean, that was coupled with like an irrational stress about how it's going to fall apart all the time too.
Yeah.
But we tell this to our patients still, the ones that have been with us for a long time, and they're like, "Man, I can't believe you guys have grown so much." And I always say, like, my downside wasn't that, right?
Mhm.
I was a dentist. I like to think I'm a pretty good dentist, right?
Mhm.
I'm not perfect, but I'm like definitely but way better than average. But we are open to this practice. If it does, everything falls apart. It doesn't work out. Yes, I'm gonna declare bankruptcy. And there's
Mhm.
like a lot of psychological damage and that kind of thing. But like I can still go work and have a really good job as a dentist, right? So for
Yeah.
me, that was the mindset that we approached it with. I was like, look, this is a big risk, especially how young we are. We're not even fully baked, like in terms of our skills. Like we have still a lot of room left to grow, even as dentists. And I think that that's forever. But a lot of it was just like, okay, well, I'm 26 years old right now, 27. I don't have kids yet. I am married. I can spend a F ton of time on this and not
Yeah.
have to like feel guilty about it because it's just like I don't have any other responsibilities right now, right? And I was
Yeah.
lucky in that I didn't. But there's a mindset of like, look, worst case scenario, I can still get a good job, right? My skills
Mhm.
will translate into a good job. So that's the story that we told ourselves to push through.
Well, I mean, it's true though, right? Like everybody needs a dentist, whether everyone goes, like, but still everyone needs a dentist. You'll always have
Yeah.
work. Uh, so I guess knowing what you know now, what's some advice you would give yourself when you were just going through that entire process?
I think the biggest piece of advice would be to start on personal development like way earlier. Like get working on it once I was done with dental school, right? Like look into Tony Robbins, read more books about business, right?
Mhm.
Read more books about mindset, understand. I have like a computer science background before that, so like the systemization part, like that's what that's not foreign to me, but learn about applying those concepts to the business and really understand like how to run an efficient business and then understand how what you need to do to scale, right? I think we're both in the Dan Martell group. I think if I had read Buy Back Your Time, which didn't
Mhm.
exist back
Right.
then we would have built a business completely differently, right? And I
Mhm.
think it would have been not that we've had not had success, but I think it would have been less mentally taxing, and I think we would have been able to scale a lot better if we had done it that way.
Yeah. Hey, so
Like
had you?
replace
Go ahead.
like the replacement ladder and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was gonna ask you like how you would have done things a little bit differently if that book had existed. Uh, yeah. So I guess now you're at how many locations?
We have 8 locations, and we'll have 2 more opening this year.
That's amazing. So, is it easy? So when you have kids, one is life changing. Well, this from what I heard, one is life changing, two is, challenging, but not completely crazy. And then three is life changing again. Is it similar in any way with opening offices, or is it kind of just like you can repeat the steps over.
It's a little bit, it's definitely more challenging to have a child, right? Because I can't
Yeah.
like close the child.
Yeah. Right.
But it is like, I mean, it is incredibly challenging, right? Because no matter what you do, um, you just like, there's still an element of risk about like how it's going to go, right? Like even if you're like, this is the demographics, the numbers, everything lines up, you could still like, it still might not work because there's a lot of factors that go into like if it's going to be successful or not. Because especially at for us now, like I'm not the care delivery, right?
Mm.
Like if I'm the care delivery at our first office, I mean, it was micromanaging like to like the 100th degree because I'm right there. I'm the care delivering the care. I'm sitting there like listening to all the conversations. I'm
Mhm.
like making sure things are going well. And that's the part where it's like building the systems that run themselves and building the machine from day one. If we had done that better, then our lives would have been a lot better, right?
Right.
But now we have an amazing team, and that's why we're able to do this a little bit more where a lot of those little details that were getting handled, like I don't have to do those anymore. I don't have to like have an eye on those things anymore because they've got it, right?
Right.
And there is a bit of more of a formula of like timing and when we need to do things. And with the first time we opened our first office, I didn't even have there's these little things called suction tips. So like it's a little vacuum thing that suctions saliva
Oh
out of your
yeah.
mouth. We
Uh,
had none. I had like had a patient and I was like, I don't have a single suction tip. Like I was in a dental assistant, I never used the suction thing, so I forgot about it. And so like it's just little things like that, like those things don't happen, right?
right.
But
Yeah.
every time is like you refine the process a little bit more.
Right. So how can I appreciate you coming on and telling your story? Just out of curiosity, like how can people work with you?
Can you see that one more time?
So just out of, like how can people work with you? Because you're running dentist office, you have like a coaching program or anything?
So not yet.
Mhm.
We don't have anything like that. Me and a friend of mine, we have been working on something. We started our podcast, and that was like our first foray to just talking about our journey. Because
Mhm.
I think when you're talking about mindset and things like, it still feels weird for me to talk like I'm an expert on doing any of this stuff. Yeah, if
Uh-huh.
that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't have a coaching program or anything like that. Like my primary business is the dental group, right? So if anyone's
Mhm.
looking for a dentist, they can definitely work for me in the Austin area. But also, if any, right now, if anyone is looking to start a dental business or wants any advice or anything like that, like I'm happy to take someone on if you just follow me on Instagram at Dr. Harcho and just DM me. I've helped a lot of people, and that's one of the things that my friend that I started the podcast with. He's also a dentist, multiple practice owner in Philadelphia. We're looking to kind of maybe bring on a couple people that we can just help through the process, document it, so then we can start building out a potential coaching program.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, that would be amazing. I'm sure it'd be super helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah,
Um, Amazing. So we'll make sure to have your Instagram and your podcast link in the
yeah,
description. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
yeah, of course. And if anyone is looking for a dentist, our group is called Enamel Dentistry. We
Mhm.
have 7 locations around the Austin area and one outside of Dallas. So that's it's our primary business. It is what I work on about like 7 8 hours a day. So that's the other piece. If anyone's looking.
Very cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. This was fun, and hopefully I didn't talk too much.
Yeah, no, you did great. Thanks.
Thanks, John.